Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting out of occupied Salagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world.
This week we feature two conversations. First up, we hear Michele and Cora. Michele is the Digital Security Coordinator of the Civil Liberties Defense Center and also does digital security for an environmental nonprofit. Cora is a co-founder of the CLDC Digital Security Program and is an associate professor of computer science at Oregon State University, with a focus on the security state and the adoption of more secure apps. They talk about surveillance and the use of apps for tracing folks' contact with people infected with COVID-19 to slow the pandemic spread. This is a segment of a larger conversation we'll be releasing in the middle of this week as a podcast in which Cora and Michele talk about and compare tools for online organizing that engage encryption and offer alternatives to the Google and other free products that often surveil their users. We speak about Jitsi, Wire, Zoom, RiseUp, Signal, VPNs, the Onion Router, Tails, KeyBase, Riot.IM, PGP, and other mentionables. More at cldc.org/digital-security. After that, we'll hear from Say of Tucson Food Share, based in Arizona. We talk about their project, how it scaled up from the Tucson Food Not Bombs to deliver groceries and hand out burritos publicly, multilingual engagement, resisting burnout, and finding joy in feeding people. More at tucsonfoodshare.org. You should get in touch if you're thinking of setting up a food distribution project and have any questions. We'd like to mention that we are now airing on Monday mornings at 2 a.m. on KODX in Seattle. You can check out that station's schedule up at kodxseattle.org or hear them in northeastern Seattle on 96.9 on the FM dial. And just a heads up, if you're looking for more content for your ears, we released a small segment of Lorenza Comboa Irvin talking about prisoner organizing in the 1970s and today. This was paired with a longer chat with Lucasville Uprising survivor and death row prisoner Bomani Shakur, aka Keith Lamar. For a little over an hour, Bomani talks about his youth, the uprisings in 1993, his case, and being railroaded. He has an execution date set by the state of Ohio for November 16th, 2023. Here's a few 10th anniversary recordings we're excited to share.
Tēnā koutou to everyone at the Final Straw Radio. This is a groggy and underslept comrade from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I just wanted to say ngā mihi mahana kia koutou, mō tō rā whānau. Warm regards for your birthday. And keep up the good work. You guys have done great work over the years, and it's one of the ways that I keep plugged into your struggles over there on Turtle Island from down here in Aotearoa. So ka kite.
Quote, "We'd like to send a big happy birthday to the Final Straw. In recent times where it seems a new anarchist or radical podcast comes out every week, we often can forget about the people that really set the stage for those of us new to the scene. For 10 years, the Final Straw has been cranking out hard-hitting shows and radio programs, connecting people from a variety of movements with each other. Over the past 10 years, TFS has spread across the airwaves and become a podcast staple well before any of us had heard of Blue Yeti mics or Audacity files. The Final Straw really deserves a standing ovation and continued support for their tireless work, week in and week out, both for bringing us listeners so much, but also for helping to truly inspire a new generation of anarchist media makers. Here's to another 10 years. From It's Going Down. Aw, that's so nice.
Good morning, Final Straw Radio, and happy fucking birthday. Super excited that you guys have made it so far. I really love your dedication to this project to be one of the most solid anarchist radio shows in existence. I love your ability to always find interesting guests and the thoughtfulness and research that goes into your questions. But I have to say, the real star of your show is Sean motherfucking Swain. Anyway, love you guys. Please keep on going and long live the motherfucking resistance. Hasta la pasta, compañeros.
TFSR is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts. Here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
You were born a hunter-gatherer. You were born a social animal, one that moves within the land and moves between bands in a world that was meant to be less measured, less exact. We were meant for lives with more meaning and less consequence. A life where connection and meaning are implicit, where animals have voices and trees have stories. A world where rivers flow unabated and water isn't a health hazard. A world without fences, a world without flags, a world without rulers and gods. It's our world, the world of primal anarchy.
We are here to say that either the world burns or the cities do. We're here to say that abusers convince you that you have no choice. We're here to say that marketers convince you that you have their options. We're here to say that you are wild, that you can be free. We're here to say that there's a match in one end and bull cutters in the other. And we aren't here to say that the world is waiting. We are here to say that the world is fighting. We are here to say that their story only ends one way. And we're here to tell you that there are others.
Primal Anarchy Podcast is a collection of rants, tirades, condemnations, readings, musings, explorations, response, interviews, and iterations hosted by Primal Anarchist writers Kevin and Natasha Tucker.
Find us online at primalanarchy.org, all major podcast platforms, and the Channel Zero Anarchist Podcast Network.
I'm speaking with Cora Boradaille and Michele Gretes. Cora is an associate professor of computer science at Oregon State University with a focus on the security state and the adoption of more secure apps. And Michele also works at Oregon State University researching and teaching communications security for social movements. Michele is the digital security coordinator for the Civil Liberties Defense Center. Thank you both so much for being willing to chat.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We co-founded the Digital Security Program at the CLDC, but the CLDC has been around for over 20 years now, right? And was founded by Lauren Regan.
Okay, so here's the long question. A concern that I've had and have heard voiced is about the normalization of surveillance by people's phones in order to track their movement and who they share physical space with. Like earlier this year, it came out that Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the U.S., the ICE as it's called, was using phone data to track and arrest undocumented people, probably mapping their social networks. There's no need for illegal wiretapping also, or warrants when phone companies and companies like Facebook willingly give up their data to government agencies. On the political right in the U.S., there's a mistrust of government overreach when it comes to certain demographics in particular, and not just limited to anti-vaxxers and other wingnut tinfoil hat folks. The weird introduction, but can you explain what contact tracing is, and what would you say to people who are afraid of the use of the state of emergency and contact tracing to further roll back pre or post-pandemic civil liberties?
Yeah, so contact tracing in epidemiology is where someone who has a disease, they sit down, using traditional methods, they would sit down and interview that person and figure out everywhere that they've been during the time that they would be infectious, anybody that they've had contact with, and then they would go and contact all of those people and places and try to figure out if anybody that they've been in contact with has picked up the disease to try to curtail the disease. And now that we have little trackers in our pockets all the time, namely our cell phones, there's the idea that we could do that digitally instead and do it a lot more efficiently, which would be great from a public health perspective, but also, yes, very scary from a civil liberties surveillance creep perspective. I think in South Korea, they did a lot with data, with surveillance data from people's credit card information, from CCTV cameras, from cell phone information to do digital contact tracing. We haven't seen that happen here. I mean, I think they have almost enough information, maybe not down to, just from our cell phone information, the cell phone company would have triangulated positions of our cell phones without asking for GPS data from our cell phones, which the cell phone companies typically don't have. But that might not be enough to get down to the granularity of being within 6 feet of another person for enough time to do contact tracing. So I think a lot of what I've seen proposed is to have special apps that would be installed on everyone's phone that would be able to do contact tracing. So two phones would know when they were in close enough proximity to each other, and you'd be able to store that information. And of course, that's a huge amount of information, right? Very detailed information, right? Or about where we've been and who we've been in proximity with. There are cryptographers, researchers who develop cryptographic techniques who are working on privacy-preserving means of doing contact tracing, which I think is, absolutely, if you're going to do this, you should do it in a privacy-preserving way if you have the means to do it. And there is one white paper that a group in Europe has been developing. Like a large group of researchers in Europe have been developing, and looks to be a robust technique for doing privacy-preserving contact tracing, so that the only information that a user with this app on their phone would get is that they have been in proximity with someone who has tested positive for COVID, for example. And the server that is managing all this would not know any information about who was in contact with who, and they use cryptographic techniques to compute this in a way that preserves the people's privacy.
So they would tell everyone to self-isolate? Like, your phone lights up saying, yes, I've been in contact, now you need to quarantine?
Now here's what you should do, whatever the recommendations from public health is.
Cool.
And, it's notable that this group from Europe is citing GDPR laws, which apparently say that if you can do something with less data, then you should do something with less data. So it's sort of like, don't collect data that you don't need to collect to meet your needs. So from a public health perspective, if you can do contact tracing in a privacy-preserving way and not in a awful surveillance gathering all the information about where everyone is all the time way, then you have to do it in the privacy-preserving way. And that's great if that's where you're starting from. I think there's still dangers, right? If they're going to then develop this app in a very short time frame and deploy this app in a very short time frame, there's not going to be there might not be the opportunity to do a robust security audit of the app to make sure that there aren't any backdoors, that it is actually computing everything in a privacy-preserving way that doesn't leak any information. So it's a very difficult problem. I think it can be done well. But, other means of doing this, of sharing information, people who have signed up for apps which do the same thing in a non-privacy preserving way, I think it does get people used to yet another layer of surveillance, much the way Facebook has gotten us used to sharing all of our information about our bowel movements on social media. That was a thing, right?
That was just one of my friends, man.
Okay.
And it was Twitter, and anyway.
So we get it from the president every day, so like whatever.
And I think other aspects of this lockdown, like having everyone be totally fine with Zoom on their computer all the time and sharing all that information with a single company, who knows what they're going to do with that information. I think that's a big risk, right? That, okay, we're just going to settle for this thing that isn't secure. When, a university could run their own, Jitsi Meet server to hold classes, and then everything could be kept within a university setting, within the university servers. But instead, they farm it out to a company to do everything for you, which I think is very dangerous.
I didn't hear if you actually broke down what GDPR, but just as a reminder for folks in the U.S., maybe what that is, or not.
Yeah,
Europe.
I actually don't know what it stands for.
The General Data Protection Regulatory Framework. I don't know, something.
Yeah, so it's this big privacy framework that came out in Europe. When did it go live? 2 years ago now?
3 years ago.
2016.
Oh, really? That long ago?
I got the Wikipedia in front of me.
Oh, great. And it's very strong. I don't know the details of it, like all the details of it. I think this is a case of, it doesn't affect me, in a day-to-day way. But I think we've all seen, emails from service providers that have some reference to GDPR, and so I think it could have impact on some of the bigger providers like Google and Facebook that need to do this, need to go to extra lengths to preserve people's data rights in Europe. They may extend that worldwide because it's easier, or they may do something different for European citizens and do something different for everyone else. Who knows? But I think it is a case of some of the parts of GDPR do say things like I just did, which was, if you can do something with less data, then do it with less data. If you don't need to keep the data to do what you need to do, then don't keep the data. I think if that's built into the design of tools, into the design of software, into the design of technology more generally, I think that could be very powerful in the long run.
Yeah, and I mean, just to build on what you said, like, one of the big benefits of the Snowden leaks was a massive increase in the development of end-to-end encrypted messaging platforms. Mm-hmm. I don't think we'd be near where we are now without that. Mm-hmm. And, data protection laws in the U.S. are terrible. So I don't think the GDPR is going to force changes on that level. But if it helps technology get developed, it gives, I think, especially left radicals who are taking the current pandemic very seriously, something to actually recommend, right? Because, like, there's no way the government here, the state here, is going to earn enough trust, or any state should, really, but especially this one, earn enough trust to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to install this crazy thing on my smartphone that the government gave me. But the reality is, like, if you're sharing location data with Apple or Google, the government can get that information already. So you can switch that off, but then maybe I can't do contact tracing with my friends. But if this app, if some app gets developed as a result of this research project in Europe that you mentioned, Cora, it could give us something as, left radicals to say, hey, here's something that you can actually do to help, control the spread of this in your communities. So it's a kind of digital autonomy sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, GDPR was passed, I mean, it was pushed for by social movements and nonprofits and NGOs and whatever, but passed by the European Union. And, like, there's a lot of presumption that there's actually going to be pushback on industry or on government agencies that might bend that to their own whim, that might actually use these backdoors and claim some security need. In cases like, since we don't have GDPR in the U.S. or in other parts of the world, like in the U.S. there is a thing called HIPAA, for instance, which is meant to protect people's medical data, which maybe this would fall under in terms of if someone has like caught COVID or is suspected to. And what do you all think about, like, the sort of trust in the government making? I mean, I feel like we kind of already talked about this, or you already talked about this, but like the government actually following its own rules or regulations concerning privacy and collection of personal data in a time like this.
Well, the government's telling us to mask up, so they're moving in the right direction, I think.
As an anarchist, I will support that.
Yeah. I think laws can I don't put a lot of trust in laws because they aren't implemented necessarily fairly or applied universally, right? Laws are used to hurt people as well as to help people, and I think that they hurt people a lot based on their identity and their wealth. I think it could help after the fact. If it was found to be abused, then you would have a means to sue the government, which is something that many wonderful nonprofits love to do.
So it could be a funding source, right? If you got, for example, if you were part of a radical group of lawyers, you could sue the shit out of the government after the fact and gain a ton of resources that way. It's possible.
I wouldn't bet my money on it, though.
Not during the fourth regime of Trump. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky. I mean, because they could write, I mean, any legislation, they could give themselves exemptions from HIPAA, for the purposes of emergency or whatever. I mean, I think that, but for us, like, for me, that's why I'm so interested in these, like, technological guarantees, right? Where you're, like, privacy preserving. It's like, it's not up to someone's decision whether to be a good person or not.
Right.
They just don't have access to the information to abuse. And I think whenever possible, that's a preference.
Yeah.
The law has its place, but I don't see, in this case, how could be used, but I don't know. Like, rhetoric-wise, though, people's health information should be protected.
I mean, they wouldn't read your glasses prescription over the phone because of HIPAA.
Right. It's true. I think just back to contact tracing, like, from a public health perspective, that stuff only works. Contact tracing only works to contain epidemics and eventually eradicate them if people trust the entity, whoever it is, that's collecting that information. Yeah. Right? It's like, if you're gonna pass a bunch of sweeping police powers on the one hand, and then walk in as a public health doctor on the other, and like interview communities about everybody that they've been in contact with, they're not going to tell you what you want to know, and so it's not going to be effective. Yeah. And so the same way with this kind of thing, people are going to just continue, or increasingly just try to thwart the data collection because they don't want the state coming down on them, especially if you're vulnerable, and that's where this virus is killing people the most. Right?
And I think people have been making connections between COVID and the contact tracing that was done for the HIV epidemic, right? And yeah, if it's tied at all to a vulnerable group, which at the time gay men were a very vulnerable group and became more vulnerable as a result of the HIV epidemic, that you're going to need a high degree of trust, and we don't have that right now. So I don't have much faith that it would actually help in the U.S.
Contact tracing. But they'll probably do it anyway without our consent. I mean, but in the long run, I think it's important to like use this moment to say there is a better way that we could do this, even if we don't have that tool. Yeah. We could build it. And I think that's important for people to be able to see a path to a better world, even if we don't have that right now.
Well, thank you, Cora and Michele, both so much for having this conversation. Where can folks engage with you and the CLDC or any of your other employers that you want them to?
CLDC.org.
Yeah, that's the best place for it.
It's the best place.
We've got posts that are...
You can reach both of us through CLDC.org.
Yep. Yeah. CLDC.org/security is where we have like posts that we try to make relevant regardless of like the changing technology. You can email security@cldc.org, but like fill in the contact form on the CLDC website. Use Tor, fill in the contact form. We'll hear about it, and we're happy to do trainings, like support communities in whatever way we can. Now's the time for people to, if we're in fallow for in-person actions and organizing apart from mutual aid stuff, now's the time to skill up. So definitely happy to make the most of this moment if we can. So don't hesitate to get in touch.
Is CLDC still doing the public trainings on Zoom?
They're doing it on Jitsi Meet now, right? Aren't they?
It depends. It's tricky. CLDC is doing a series of public trainings at this moment, and best to check their website for details on that. But they have used Zoom because they fear that it will not be super reliable to try to use Jitsi Meet at scale. Like if you're talking about hundreds of people, and you want these messages to reach people, right? That is a potential problem, of course, obviously, because no one trusts or should trust Zoom. But once you're getting on the scale of like having a public training of hundreds of people, or potentially more, you kind of lose control of privacy or confidentiality at that point. You kind of just have to be like, I'm on a stage speaking, and I should just speak as though I'm in a public forum. So I don't see there's a huge problem with it. I think one thing we could do better is to always have a channel for people to be able to ask questions that don't come across Zoom. So having like a parallel, whatever, like RiseUp pad or whatever, where people are able to ask questions where they don't have to like identify themselves to Zoom.
Or just an email address that they could send questions to live and somebody curating that maybe.
Yeah, anything. I mean, they think lots of options.
Cool. So people can find those up on the CLDC website when they're coming up. That's great.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Late this morning, I heard the rifles Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Late this morning I heard the rifles, and it is time for me to go. The fairest flower in all the mountains, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. The fairest flower in all the mountains is the black rose that sets us free. We will join her and fight together. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. We will join her and fight together, or we will surely die alone. The winter's coming, the snows are on us. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. The winter's coming, the snows are on us. Now we must build fires of our own. The hungry servants have stopped complaining. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. The hungry servants have stopped complaining, and all the masters wonder why. Inside his castle, the king is sleeping. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Inside his castle, the king is sleeping. Let us be sure he sleeps too long. A tattered banner as black as midnight. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. A tattered banner as black as midnight. Can't tell you where my love has gone. Late this morning I heard the rifles. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Late this morning I heard the rifles, and it is time for me to go.
Would you be so kind as to introduce yourself with your pronouns and location, any groups that you want to identify yourself with?
Cool. I'm Say. I use they pronouns. I organize with Food Not Bombs Tucson, which is the group that is running this program called Tucson Food Share, which is a mutual aid project in town, sharing free groceries with anyone who asks for them.
Can you talk about how Tucson Food Share developed and a little more about what you do with groceries? Are there deliveries involved, or do people come to one place? And do you specifically bag up for individuals?
Mm-hmm. Well, the initial inspiration came from an email from some comrades in Atlanta who had already started a similar program that they're calling Food for Life. And they just sent out an email that was kind of sharing what they were up to, and that was in early March when it was pretty obvious to most of us that this was going to be a big deal, but things hadn't started shutting down yet, but we knew that it was going to happen at some point or another. So our plan was to just kind of rip off their model entirely, which is getting donations, packaging, and then distributing directly to people's homes by driving to deliver them. And while we were in the initial organizing stage, we ended up deciding kind of last minute that we would also have 2 in-person distributions so that people could come and directly get food from us, those who were comfortable or able to leave their home. And that way we would make sure that we're able to give more food to more people instead of being bottlenecked by how many delivery drivers there were. And so now we still do that twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. People can come and get food. And then on Tuesdays is when we make our deliveries. And I think right now our deliveries are only going to a few dozen households. But every week in the in-person distribution, we're guessing that somewhere between 200 and 300 households of varying sizes are receiving food from us every week.
That's awesome. Is it, can you say anything about the folks that are receiving food? Is it like any specific demographics, or do people sign up for it over social media, or is it a person-to-person, like word of mouth thing?
It's mostly word of mouth. We made some flyers. We put them on our social media, and I think because the need is so great, and because there's so much communication between people about what kind of resources are available, word seemed to spread really quickly. So we have hardly done any outreach. We haven't flyered anywhere in person. We made 2 flyers, one in English and one in Spanish, and just put them on Instagram and Facebook, and then posted them in a couple of local mutual aid Facebook groups, and that was it. And when we first put up the flyers, it was like the day before our first distribution, and I think about 100 people came and got food the next day.
Wow!
And we were not prepared for it to be that many people. I don't know what we expected, but because we called it Tucson Food Share, we're not a neighborhood-specific group. There's a couple of neighborhood mutual aid groups that are delivering groceries, but we didn't confine ourselves to any particular demographic. We wanted to do our best to be as accommodating for people who are experiencing the most marginalization before and during the pandemic, but we're not limiting who we share with.
Mm-hmm.
Indirectly, it ends up being limited because we haven't tried that hard to get the word out, but we're already operating pretty much at capacity. We can't really, we're operating out of a bar and restaurant that had closed down for a while, and they're actually currently doing takeout lunch. So we're just there in the evening, and we do as much as we possibly can in that space. So as more people find out about us, it'll start to be, I think we'll start running out of food sometime. Some of us have tried to put more effort into encouraging and accommodating people to make their own projects like this that are more localized.
Mm-hmm.
because it's like we're one group of people in one location, and we can only do so much, and the need is huge for food, especially if it's free. And that's part of why we're doing interviews and stuff, is not even just Tucson specific. We want to be putting the word out that it sounds kind of fancy when you first hear about it, but especially if you're doing it on more of a neighborhood scale, it doesn't have to be super complicated. Just a handful of people can get together and find a space and start distributing food in their neighborhoods. And that feels really important. Obviously not just for food, but food is a pretty basic thing, and people need it.
Well, so like before this was happening, I'm sure there were pre-existing programs, whether they were run by nonprofits or church groups or community groups of varying sorts that were distributing food, maybe any food banks. Are those things still functioning? If like they're sort of like operating in the same ecosystem, or if like the work that Tucson Food Share is doing is like supplemental to the pre-existing work that those nonprofits have been doing?
Mm-hmm. A lot of people stopped programs, especially programs that were sharing already prepared food, which is really bad, and that's part of the reason why we still do our regular Food Not Bombs Sunday shares, where we share burritos in a park that a lot of people, many of whom don't have shelter, will hang out in.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have to do burritos instead of making it more of like a social gathering with different items to choose from. But yeah, so a lot of those programs shut down or scaled back a lot. There's a huge food bank here. They're kind of a behemoth compared to other food banks, where they have a giant warehouse and they often supply other like churches and other nonprofits that give food away. And then they also give stuff out of their warehouse, and they scaled back a lot. They stopped taking new volunteers. They stopped taking food donations, only money donations. And from what I heard, in the first couple of weeks, they were actually turning people away. Like, too many people were coming to them to get food, and it wasn't necessarily a shortage of food as much as a shortage of labor and like a not very effective distribution model. So we've actually been in conversation with people at the food bank, trying to kind of slash away at the red tape that comes along with getting donations from them. They tend to require signatures and addresses and names and IDs and all these things that kind of our entire ethos is not to require any of that. And it's just like, if you want food, we have it, here you go. So that's actually happening. They've been removing more and more restrictions. So that's something that's promising, I think, for people in any location, that a lot of the nonprofits are more willing to be flexible than they usually are, and are down to have conversations with community members, with mutual aid projects, and potentially give more things out without asking so many questions and having so many requirements.
Yeah, that's good. It seems like that's the thing that I've heard about, is like food distribution projects finding that like food banks in the area had to scale back, especially because that's one venue for volunteering that seniors who maybe have a little more time on their hand will engage with. And during the pandemic, if they're one of the most at-risk populations, they're gonna quarantine themselves. And so, but that's awesome that you all have been finding some inroads with the pre-existing infrastructure. So you had mentioned making the flyers in English and Spanish, and I'm wondering, like, how does the Tucson Food Not Bombs and Tucson Food Share do, in your opinion, with not just presenting information in English? Like that's another thing, is like monolingualism is like pretty common, at least in the part of the country that I live in, and being so close to Mexico and with so many surrounding like indigenous communities, I'd like to hear how it's been like not only reaching out to communities who would be receiving food, but also if there's much of a diversity of language in the folks that are doing the food packaging.
Mm-hmm. It really varies. We try to, as much as we can, make sure that there's a fluent Spanish speaker at every distribution, and sometimes it's someone who's not necessarily fluent, but there's always been someone who's able to communicate in Spanish. I'm going to guess around a third of the people who come in person to get food from us only speak Spanish, or at least they speak Spanish and not English. And so that feels really important to do whatever we can to accommodate those people. And part of the simplicity of our process makes it doable, even when there isn't a fluent Spanish speaker present. That it's like, simple questions that we're asking. It's really how many people are you picking up for, and do you want produce? I think those are the only things we ask, and then we give them food. And we also have two hotlines. One is English and one is Spanish. So people who are bilingual will be on the Spanish hotline and able to communicate back to everyone else. I think we could definitely do more to be accommodating in terms of language, and I think that's always a good attitude in mutual aid projects, to understand that we're never doing everything and we're never perfect, and if we ever think that we are, that's a problem, and we're probably missing something. And language is definitely an aspect that we could improve. I think we've done a pretty good job, but I think there could be more outreach, and so, like, in an indirect sense, because we're sharing through our social media, most people who follow our social media speak English, and they're sharing with their other communities that speak English. So in that vague sense, the word is not getting out as much as it could to Spanish-speaking communities. And, there's not always someone answering the hotline. Just, there's a million cracks that exist in this kind of thing, and people slip through, and it's really hard to see that and not, like, kind of freak out and frantically, like, try to do everything and try to support everybody.
Yeah. But like you said, like, seeing that there's, like, always room for improvement, and being able to hear, like, oh, this is a place that we're falling short. How do we work on addressing this? Like, just like that approach is human scale, right? It's achievable.
And I think that speaks to the need for people to be organizing within their own communities, and to be supporting adjacent communities in their organizing. And so if we can be connected with and supporting other groups that are supplying resources to more Spanish-speaking communities, then we don't have to be the ones handing the food off. If it means that we can help people organize, we can help people get food, or we can sometimes we'll just give other groups food, and maybe soon we'll be at a point where we can just be giving other groups money directly. I think that's really important for there to be lots of groups that are more community specific, and for those groups to talk and share resources, because there's always going to be some communities that are more left out, and some that are more heavily supplied, and we need to do our best to redistribute that.
Yeah. So kind of along those lines, the like distinction between charity and mutual aid can be pretty hard to point out. How do you think y'all have done, like, expanding participation from within the communities needing the food? And do you have any tips for other folks feeling their way through a similar question?
I really think flexibility is key. We definitely teeter on the edge of between mutual aid and charity sometimes, and part of that is just the nature of organizing in this pandemic, that we're not able to interface with people as much. We're not able to have as many conversations with the people who are getting food from us, unless they call us or email us, and we try to have a lot of conversation that way. I think a lot of it is is really subtle, and it's in how it's kind of a social question, because if you start a project like this and then you put the word out, hey, we need volunteers, you might get a lot of people coming out. We have a volunteer form, and I think at this point, I haven't checked in a while. I checked a week ago, and 100 people have filled it out. And so there's tons of people who might be totally new to this kind of organizing, totally new to our political ideals, and people will come in expecting often basically a nonprofit, basically a charity. So people will show up and be like, I'm here, what do I do? And they expect people with authority to tell them, you do this, and they do it, and they don't ask questions. And sometimes it can be really easy, especially when we're frantic, to fall back into that model for people who know more of what's going on, to just kind of dictate, oh, you do this and you do that. And I think it's a really beautiful opportunity for us to unlearn that subtle way of creating authority and hierarchy, so that, if you're in a position where people might come to you to ask questions, I think it's really cool to ask that same question back to that person. Basically, if someone's like, how many beans should I put in each bag? And I might say, we've been putting 4 cups, but do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think there should be more? Or if someone asks, where do I put this? I'll just say, what do you think? And sometimes it's a little clunky because people might not be prepared to be participating so directly. But long term, I think it creates really strong collectives. It welcomes people in. It shows people that we're respecting everyone's ideas and everybody's input. And so we get more input, and then we have more flexibility. We refine our systems a lot better because we have so much input coming in from all different people. And then it feels like the collective's huge now, because even someone who just came by for a few hours to pack some bags has contributed their ideas, and it feels like they're part of it in that way. And I don't know, I think that's really fun. For me, that's how I got deep into this stuff. Was, I don't know, I started going to Food Not Bombs in LA a handful of years ago, and I was just like, which vegetables do I chop? What do I do? And then over time, I felt really empowered to contribute in decision making, and I'm still doing that stuff now. It's empowering. Yeah,
absolutely. And it really challenges the way that we not only the way that we think about our contribution and participation in communities, but who those communities are, and what they look like.
Yeah, and I think that's huge too, because I think we got caught up in this at first, that we were just reaching out to all of our friends and comrades that we already knew. And these are people who often were involved in other organizing or other things that were stressful. We're all frantically trying to throw together these projects and then asking each other for help. And it really kind of, it felt really insular, that we were only talking to people that we already knew. And once we figured out how to welcome new people in, it really opened up, and it became less of this we're this tight crew that's all really close and makes all these decisions together, to this big kind of vague thing, because there's so many people coming in and out. And yeah, it brings so much flexibility, and it's really fun, and all these new friendships are happening. So cool.
So one of the things that I find really hard to grasp right now is like how immediate and yet slow rolling this whole crisis is. Like, people are literally dying. People have been out of work. Tensions are rolling over in households where people are quarantining together, but it also feels like it might go on forever, which I know it's not going to. But how have you and your folks been thinking about how you pace your work, and how have you done it avoiding burnout and recognizing that this is like more of a marathon than a sprint?
Oh, I mean, that's huge. And honestly, there's been some burnout at varying degrees. And really at the beginning, we were straight up sprinting for like 3 weeks. I personally was spending almost my entire waking day, every single day for 3 weeks, thinking about Tucson Food Share, like almost nothing else. And it was not healthy, because we were like, oh shit, this is a huge deal and we need to do something right now. And a lot of people managed to get base to really step back, myself included, after that initial sprinting, because so many new volunteers came in. And that feels like a big element. You know, they say many hands make light work, and there's a lot of hands right now. A lot of people who are unemployed, a lot of people who are feeling just like not sure what to do with themselves. You know, we as a broader society attach so much personal value to our jobs, and there's all these people who've lost their jobs and they want to support their community and they don't know how. And we need to welcome people like that in, instead of like burning the candle at both ends. If we're
yeah. No, that's definitely a good perspective. I know, like, I've also seen in our local community people, like, lots of check-in with each other, lots of like offering of like, hey, like, you doing okay? Or like self-imposed, you know, or like as a group being like, we should have a limit of this many kinds of shifts per week per person, just so that people have a chance to like recover. And because, you know, if we're just running from like shift to shift of doing food deliveries or doing like renter organizing over like Jitsi calls or whatever, or like handing out coffee to houseless folks and food distribution. Like, if you do too much of that and it becomes a grind, like, people are going to feel that when they're getting food from you, and they've already got so much stress going on that this isn't your like wage job. This is you interfacing with other human beings who are living through the same crisis as you are. And it's not good for anyone, let alone your physical health, you know. But
that's really huge what you said. It's not your wage job. It's, you know, just yet another deeply ingrained thing that I think we can easily accidentally fall into, is that we might start treating this like a job and, you know, go, I got to do a lot really fast. And then, and we burn out, and it's not sustainable. It's not joyful. And this stuff can be fun. And it can be really hard in, you know, emotionally, knowing everything that's going on, knowing the ways that people's suffering is so much greater right now, and that people are so much more desperate right now. It can be easy to feel like I need to do as much as I possibly can. And for a lot of us, it's just a question of boundaries. And it's just like accepting that, you know, we're not going to be able to do everything. And like, some people aren't going to get food, and that's okay. Like, it's good that we're doing something, and we also need to have fun. We need to get sleep. We need to do whatever it is that helps us have fulfilling lives, because that's kind of what those of us into trying to build a new world through radical politics or whatever, we want a world that's where we thrive, where we're not just surviving, where we're thriving. And we should afford that to ourselves, and we should support each other doing that. And that might mean, encouraging somebody who's looking like they're getting pretty worn out, encouraging them to take a few days off, and nobody calls them for a few days, no one asks them any questions, and they're just resting or whatever. And that's something that we've done sometimes. People will go like out in the desert, go camping, or maybe they'll just like turn their phone off for a while, and getting those moments of reprieve and rest is really crucial. And also just respecting that sometimes people are gonna just drop out of the project, and that's their decision to make. And that's been a thing that we've been doing in Food Not Bomb for years now, is like really encouraging people to not show up if they don't feel like it, and that's totally okay, and that we don't need to make excuses, and that we don't want to pressure each other into doing any more than we feel up to doing.
Yeah. Well, are there any of the groups in your area that you network with that folks might be inspired to hear about? Any groups that are like doing first aid related stuff, or tenant organizing towards rent strike, those sort of things?
Mm-hmm. There's a Tucson rent strike group that I lurk on the signal thread every once in a while. I go to a Jitsi meeting or give my 2 cents, but it's a really great group of people doing the best with the kinds of organizing infrastructure that we have. There's this group called Tucson Medic Initiative that I wish I knew more about what all that they're doing, but they made hand sanitizer. It's like this really nice herbal hand sanitizer with creosote and lavender, and it like doesn't dry your hands out, and the smell is really calming. So they've been sharing us little bottles of that to hand out to people who are driving or people who get food from us on Sundays. There's a couple neighborhood mutual aid groups that have formed, one in Keeling, and there's one on the west side that's newer. And those groups are really cool because it's more personal and it's more tailored to each household. Whereas like what we do, it's kind of like a food bank, and we just give you a big box of whatever we have. And I think that's really powerful to, as much as we can, be like really doing this in an interpersonal way. And I think that's happening everywhere, and it doesn't have a big fancy such and such mutual aid on it, but like everyone's doing mutual aid already, and people are doing it a lot more right now, and it's really cool to just try to like make more connections, like broaden and deepen our web of interpersonal connections, and then in that way skills and resources are able to travel further.
Yeah, definitely. Well, how can listeners learn more about Tucson Food Share or contribute if you need to take donations or just get engaged?
Mm-hmm. For people in Tucson or people who have thick pocketbooks, you can go to TucsonFoodShare.org and you can sign up to volunteer. You can request a delivery to your home. You can make a financial donation, and you can find out when and where to go pick up food for yourself. We encourage anyone who is considering at all getting food from us, that you totally deserve it, and you should totally come by and get some.
Awesome. Is there anything that I didn't ask about that you wanted to speak to?
Oh, more getting in touch with us. So Food Not Bombs Tucson has an Instagram. It's foodnotbombs_Tucson. And we have a Facebook. It's Food Not Bombs Tucson. And on our website, there's phone numbers and an email address. And I want to really encourage people to hit us up if you're thinking about starting something similar or not so similar to this, and you want any advice on how to get started. We'd be happy to talk to you, and it would feel really good to support more people getting their own mutual aid projects off the ground. And eventually we will have, hopefully this week, a resource on our website that gives kind of a basic how to do this yourself, step by step. So people can, maybe by the time this airs, it'll be on our website,
cool.
TucsonFoodShare.org.
Yeah, we'll definitely link that in the show notes, and if it's up by next Sunday, or like early next week, then hopefully folks can check that out. Mm-hmm. Say thank you so much for taking the time to chat and for all that y'all are doing.
Totally. Thanks for chatting with me. It was fun.
It was a pleasure. This is The Final Straw, and I'm Bursa Goodness. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned co-op in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events up at their website, firestorm.coop.